morning, everyone. Good morning. I hope you all had a truly fabulous evening. There were a number of amazing parties and events going on last night, a chance to network, a chance to continue all the good business plans and opportunities that got started here at Transact, and of course, a chance to raise a glass and unwind a little bit. So I hope you all had a wonderful, wonderful evening. This morning, what we're doing here at Transact is a really unique program. We're taking a focused examination around the small merchant segment. The SMB space is rich with opportunity, potential, new business, and leveraging all the great innovation that this industry is about. And we recognize that at ETA. And so this morning, we're giving you a preview, perhaps, of what is to come from our additional events over the course of this calendar year, recognizing the role that the small merchant segment will continue to play in the evolving payments ecosystem. So with that, it's my great privilege and honor to introduce to you today Paul McAdam from J.D. Power to get our first panel of the morning started. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, good morning, everybody. So the breakfast crowd over there, please feel free to filter over. We have a fantastic panel assembled. Thank you for that introduction, Amy. We're going to talk about the small business marketplace. At J.D. Power, we did research recently on this topic. Instead of having a researcher talk about it, we're going to engage with a group of experts. Right? All of these firms are firms that are covered in the research. They're firms that actually, they've purchased the studies, so they've seen it, and their organizations are using it in various ways. We're going to have a discussion on really get their feedback on what they think about the results and how they think their firms and the industry at large can use this information to improve the customer experience for the important small business segment of the market. So I'm going to run through a quick set. I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves quickly, and then we'll get into the agenda. In terms of myself, Paul McAdam, I manage half a dozen of our studies in the credit card and banking practice at J.D. Power. Been there for about 30 years and have been working in this industry for nearly 30 years. So, Michelle, how about you?
Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Herron. I lead strategy, marketing, and small business for CyberSource and Authorize.net, which are part of the Visa family.
Yeah, my name is Mark Schulze. I'm the co-founder of Clover, the first data company at this point. My background really is all about changing businesses, and so that's what drives me, excites me, and that's why we built Clover from the start.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Adam Lebofsky. I'm with JPMorgan Chase in the Wholesale Payments Division. I lead our client experience area in merchant services. I'm a 20-year veteran of financial services on the issuing side, the retail banking side, consulting side, and of course, merchant services.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And thank you all for being here early in the morning, last day of the conference. You see the agenda. Let's just jump in. First thing I need to do, we're going to be talking about research, so quick few slides to let you know what we did. We decided about a year ago at J.D. Power that we were going to open up research in this marketplace, going out to small merchants and asking them to rate satisfaction with their acquirer. Now, as you know, in the small business market, that could be a bank, could be any one of the firms on this stage, technology companies, Square, PayPal, they're all in there. We fielded this research in October, November timeframe of last year. As you can see in the slide, we set it up so that we're looking at both card present and card not present. In the card not present side, it's really just e-commerce. We didn't focus so much on phone and mail in the research. We ended up evaluating 27 firms, 14 of which are kind of larger ones that where we gathered enough sample to actually provide rankings and satisfaction scores. And I'll kind of walk through some of the other details in terms of what we covered. Here are the 19 largest brands that were covered in the study. listed alphabetically. And we actually set this up, and these three firms are perfect examples of this, of the multiple brands, multiple, sometimes product line names that a small business would recognize. So we tried to be as careful as we could to set up the questionnaire so that, you know, a customer of Chase could have the relationship with Chase Bank, maybe could be Chase Merchant Services. Payment Tech is still out there in some places. WePay. Certainly, you have the similar situation with Clover and First Data, the company that Mark is with, and in terms of Visa, the brand names that were actually included in the questionnaire were CyberSource and Authorized.net. So you can get a sense of who we covered, and you know, many of these firms are in this exhibit hall today. When we look at satisfaction, so we don't just ask a question, we try to break the experience down into what we call factors. We worked with a group of acquirers last year to help us think about how to do this, and we settled on evaluating customer satisfaction with things like cost of service, with servicing interactions, which would include in person with the salespeople, phone, mobile, web, all of that. Payment processing, which is about the speed and accuracy of the payment processing experience. And then equipment and technology, again, for point of sale and e-commerce environments. And just you know, very quickly to give you a sense of the types of things that were evaluated, these are some of the types of questions that people responded to within these factors. So, with that as the background, let's open up the panel discussion. This is a rank chart of the satisfaction score in this year's Merchant Services study. You can see this 824. The way J.D. Power does this work is we have a 1,000-point scale indexing system. And as you can see, Merchant Services does pretty well at the 824 versus some other types of studies that I thought might be comparable and interesting to show you all. And I got to tell you, about a year ago, when we started this process, and when I started talking with people at this conference and in other places, I heard reactions like, wow, boy, that satisfaction, that's going to be kind of ugly. I'm not sure we want to see this. But in fact, it's not bad when you look at it, compared to how other consumer and business-oriented studies stack up. So this leads to a really interesting set of questions, particularly, I think, as it relates to banks. Because as you can see in our small business satisfaction study, we've got an 800 versus an 824. So what is it about Merchant Services that's driving higher satisfaction than just a regular small business banking relationship? So I guess the obvious person to set that question up to would be Adam. So what do you think? What do you think is explaining this?
Great question, and I'll tell you, we had the same reaction internally too. Like, we didn't want to know, but we did want to know, realized we had to know. And when the results came back, we were also surprised that we had a lift in the Merchant Services business over business banking. And as we really thought about it, we think it comes down to the nature of where Merchant Services is integrated with small businesses, and specifically in their business operations. So it drives a lot of their satisfaction on a day-to-day basis with their customers across the counter from them. And that integration with the operations is, I think, what's driving the satisfaction compared to banking relationships, which is more of a back-end enabler for our small businesses to conduct business. And while clearly very important to the relationship, it's not quite as integrated. And I think when you could create that combination of it's embedded into the operations and it helps a small business run more smoothly, I think they raise their hand and tell you that in the satisfaction score.
Yeah. Now, Mark, you've been kind of working in this industry for a number of years from the standpoint of creating, hardware, software, and the payment processing side of it. What do you think? Is this surprising to you?
I think it's an indicator that we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah.
When we started Clover, we started it specifically because when we went out and talked to merchants, we realized, 7 years ago how dissatisfied they were. And I think they hadn't kept up with the technology, they hadn't kept up with the software that was available. They had companies that were almost holding these businesses hostage in certain ways, charging them exorbitant fees. You know, $5,000 for a point of sale that's based on a PC that's probably worth $500 plus service fees. And so while I think this is good, I think we're headed in the right direction. I think there's a lot more to do, because this is top of mind for merchants. And if it's we see merchant services as sort of the center point of a merchant's life, of their business. It is their lifeblood, and ultimately it should be the top. It should be the highest point of satisfaction. And this is fantastic to see the quantitative data. Qualitatively, I've seen it as well, because when I first used to go out and interview merchants when we were starting Clover and try to get a sense of what sorts of features they were interested in, what they liked, I'd say, how do you like your point of sale? And they go, this piece of junk, I hate it. And so I steeled myself the first time we launched Clover. We had our first merchants, because I thought, all right, I just figured merchants are cranky and they're too busy and they don't want to think about it. And that was true. It was largely true because it was an impediment to their business. It was a necessary evil, if you will, that they had to take credit cards and they had to have this thing that was dissatisfying, that required a lot of training and a lot of use. And then when we went out and started doing customer interviews with Clover, it was fascinating, because I'd say, what do you think? And I was ready for them to say, this piece of junk. And they're like, oh, this? Oh, yeah, I like it. Yeah, it's easy. Yeah. Didn't really have that much to say. And that's the idea. Over time, I think as technology gets better, it works its way into the merchant sphere, that it will become, hopefully, almost invisible, to the point where it's a natural part of their business. And therefore, when you go out and do the qualitative studies, you'll see that hopefully it's the top.
My take on this as well is I think there's probably a technology element to this. So if you look at business wireless versus just wireline business telecom, right? Take a look at the mobile credit card app consumer versus the credit card satisfaction industry average. So there's an element here to deeper technology engagement, I think, that's important as well. So get to Michelle here in a second, but just to kind of break down the results for you a bit further. So in the questionnaire, we asked the small business respondents, and we really did try to find the business owner or the someone who at least has a shared decision-making process in banking and financial types of decisions, and we asked them, what is your primary sales channel? Now we know that there are small businesses that are omni-channel, and we track to that. But in terms of evaluating the overall satisfaction, we wanted to break it down to the channel. So in the questionnaire, we have e-commerce merchant. E-commerce is the primary channel. Using a link to send an invoice, which is more of a B2B type of situation. Some of these are kind of wordy. The next one is really the use of dongle and wireless swipe or dipping devices in a store environment, which as you can see at 819 is quite a bit higher than the use of similar square types of devices outside of a store. But the net of it, as you can see, is that e-commerce merchants are reporting higher satisfaction. And Michelle, this is obviously your business at Visa. So what do you think, and what might some of your experience and insights within Visa indicate to what's driving these differences?
Yeah, I don't think we were very surprised to see the previous result or this high level of satisfaction for e-commerce. We have a pretty robust customer insights program at CyberSource and Authorized.net, and we've seen similar levels of satisfaction, almost to the point where I think we're quite hard on ourselves as a company and as an industry, because we can see some of the challenges sometimes, but we're always delighted to see how happy our customers really are. I think there's probably a couple of factors that could be contributing to what we're seeing here. First of all, if this is your primary sales channel, you're probably a pretty savvy merchant. And so you've made smart choices, you're probably pretty technology focused yourself. And so the opportunity to make the right solution choice for your organization, I think, is quite high. I also think that there's a lot of transparency in e-commerce purchasing, not just from a pricing perspective, but really from an overall solutions perspective. So much of the physical card-present world, that buying still can happen face-to-face. We're getting much more digitally savvy in those channels as well. But a lot of e-commerce purchasing, whether it's for your platform, your shopping cart, your gateway, your acquiring, you're going to do that online as well. And so I think when you look at, our brand and many other brands out there selling these capabilities, there's a lot of information online, really transparent as to what you're getting with the service or the capability. And so I think what that leads to is a lot of value-based buyers that end up being pretty happy with the capability that they're getting in the long term.
Okay. So continuing to move through, one of the factors that we measured was called cost of service. I didn't mention it on the prior slide when I showed you the diagram of the factors that we measured, but cost of service did end up coming through as having the highest weight or the highest importance in satisfaction with small business merchants. So surprise, surprise, price is important, right? The way we set up this year's study is we decided to not publish results, the brand-specific results. We decided to treat this year's study as a pilot, okay, so that the firms that are being rated could see it and understand it, and quite honestly, provide us feedback on how to improve the survey instrument, because we absolutely realize the complexity of this industry and the various players who are servicing and selling to these small businesses, and we just want to make sure that when we do come forward next year, publish the ranking and say, hey, somebody's number one, that we all feel good about it and can be assured that it's as accurate as possible. So that's why we have this listed as kind of brand 1 through brand 14. And just to remind everybody, when we're asking people, the small businesses, to evaluate their satisfaction with cost of service, we're really asking them about, it comes down to 3 key questions in our survey instrument: the clarity of the information provided about pricing, the reasonableness, right? The reasonableness of the fees and given the services provided, and also this sense that there's some ability to control pricing. That the merchant can manage their cost in some way. So as you can see, pretty wide difference in the overall industry rankings amongst the brands that came through with higher samples. 855 versus a 722, that is a wide gap. On the other side of the slide, you can see some of these you would probably assume. We've already talked a bit about e-commerce, higher satisfaction there than card-present merchants, larger $1 million plus versus under $1 million, and of course, within a banking relationship or within other provider relationships, sometimes the small business owner feels like they have a service rep or an account manager that they can work with. It did end up in the study that banks came through as collectively, their customers came through as having the highest levels of satisfaction with cost of service. So that kind of brings it back to you again, Adam, in terms of what you see at Chase that you think could be driving that, yeah, relative to other types of providers that small businesses might be interacting with.
Sure. Yeah, I think banks really do have an advantage in their integration across complementary breadth of banking products, across safety, security, across really a whole range of things, regulatory support. And I think to some degree you're seeing a little of that spillover here when a client thinks about cost, and I think more broadly about cost. For Chase, that means really that tight integration between the merchant processing and their business banking, so that a merchant can see the life cycle transactions in a way that connects their processing to their funding and their deposits and their cash flows. So in banking, we're able to do that more clearly for clients, and I think being able to move that online really creates an environment where merchants can seek to understand those differences best. And I think what we see here when we look at card present versus card not present is the role of technology in performing those functions for clients and the ability to connect that life cycle using technology enhanced ways, whether it's reporting or other types of services. I'll share one last thing with you around costing, because I think part of cost of service is also the, do I know what I'm paying? And you guys have a lot of fees, and we do have a lot of fees. But the ability to do things like simplified pricing or flat rate pricing has really created an entry point for merchants to get in and understand their pricing at a simple level. And one of the, I'll call it shockers for us, is that we saw flat rate pricing as a satisfier even in some larger clients when we looked at the study results. But the really interesting thing is that as clients, as merchants progress through their life cycle, we see that change a little bit, where the more mature you get as a business, the more you understand payments, the more your revenues grow. Things like internet pass-through pricing becomes a better way for you to manage your costs. It's a little overwhelming at first because of the sheer nature of it, but as you go on, it becomes a little easier to understand as you get more comfortable with the environment. So the ability to meet the clients where they are in terms of the life cycle of their business, where they're trying to get to, and match pricing plans with transparency that allow them to have that balance, I think is really important.
Yeah. And so Mark, at Clover, you work with partners to help them provide services at the lowest cost possible, and then you also work directly with small businesses. So when you take a look at this card present, right? Card present, smaller, no assigned account manager. I mean, you see why Square does so well. Number one, key competitor of yours. But so when you think about this card present space and look to the future, what do you think it's going to take to drive up that satisfaction number?
Yeah, I think it's all about clarity, and it's kind of what you touched on a little bit. Clarity and utility, right? So if the merchant understands what they're paying for, there's less angst. And the problem today, things like Interchange Plus, is wildly confusing for people, especially because traditionally they'll get their bank deposit and they'll get their report from Clover, and they won't match up, and then they have to go find a third service and try to figure out this is endemic to the industry. And so we're fixing that piece at least on the reporting side. But I do think that the industry overall needs to do a lot of cleanup around just transparency around fees, because consistently merchants just want an explanation. If they don't have an explanation, they don't understand why something is there, then they feel ripped off. If they go, oh, that's why, then they get, oh, it's a security fee or whatever, and then they understand why. And then I think utility is the second thing. So we found that if you add real utility, if you really offer a service or something of value to them, the merchants, their price sensitivity disappears. It really disappears. And you can see that today, for example, with quick service restaurants and massive companies like Grubhub. They're paying huge fees to companies like Grubhub, giant fees. And the numbers I've seen, they make thousands of dollars per merchant per year on average. That's probably as much as the processor makes. And they're happy to do it. In fact, they want to sign up with more. And so I think as an industry, if we just continue to increase the utility that we provide, and if we are more transparent around what is interchange, more transparent about all the merchant acquirer fees, then I think that you'll continue to see that number rise. It is it's no longer a mountain we need to climb. I think 5 years ago it was a mountain. I think it's a hill we need to surmount, and hopefully we'll move in that direction soon.
We'll come back to this utility point in a few minutes. Michelle, same type of question for you, I think. So, e-commerce satisfaction is higher, right? Nice, nice lead, I guess you would say. In terms of maintaining that advantage, as people in the industry and competitors really focus on that card present challenge, I'm assuming that over time that satisfaction gap will narrow. in looking forward in the future, what do you think needs to change or be done different from an e-commerce standpoint with cost of service satisfaction?
Well, I wish I had like a really wildly different point of view from Adam and Mark to just make this super interesting. But I think the points that everybody's bringing up are so perfectly stated, and what's really contributing to what we see in e-commerce in general and in these satisfaction scores. So I think it goes back to, a few minutes ago, I talked about the transparency in the solution buying cycle. So knowing exactly what you're getting from a capability perspective. I also think that e-commerce has led the way in terms of transparent pricing. So if you go to our website, many other, whether you're doing that e-commerce platform, shopping cart, gateway, you're able to look at a website and understand exactly what you're paying. There's no gotchas, there's no hidden fees. And so I think ultimately, combined with the fact that we're working with probably a higher value-based purchaser that's really looking for that full solution capability, and that understanding that 20 basis points doesn't mean anything to me when I'm getting the capability that I need. So I think ultimately that's what's happened. I think there's so much more opportunity. One other thing that I think has happened in e-commerce that is absolutely happening in card present as well, and where I think it's going to compress those scores, is solution bundling. So the opportunity for a merchant to really buy a multitude of capabilities, whether that's the front-end service, inventory management, things that from a technology perspective just plug in and can be purchased all in one. Again, that really clear sense of knowing what I'm paying, and things that just work together. That typically will truly delight the customer, and they'll ultimately be very satisfied with the product they've gotten from you.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So continuing on the pricing side of things, way we set up the research is we have questions that we call them KPIs, right? Key performance indicators. These are questions that we think are going to be important, and then we run through the math at the end of the study and look at correlations, and we're able to determine what experiences are particularly important in improving satisfaction. This ended up being the most important factor, KPI, in the entire study. This sense that the small business feels that they're providing support, information, content, right, to help them understand their pricing and fee structure. Makes total sense, right? And again, from an industry standpoint, you see, again, a pretty widespread in some cases, right? At the leading firm, 81% of the small businesses feel that, yep, I feel good. I'm getting what I want, and you're dropping down to about half at one particular firm. And so there's certainly a lot happening here. One key element is we all know that ISO channels, reseller relationships, it just introduces another player, another element in there that can muddy up communication and information flow in some cases. So Mark at First Data Clover, you work with these channels. I mean, what do you think? Either comment on what's working for you, or from an industry perspective, in terms of enabling the ISO channels to have information to help address this type of problem.
Yes, I think ISOs in particular offer a real opportunity. They tend to be close to the merchant. They tend to be in the community in many cases. And we are endeavoring to work with ISOs more deeply to allow them to provide the kind of support in the kind of pricing that's necessary. And to your point earlier, I mean, I think one of the biggest factors in, say, Square's success is the fact that pricing is so transparent. Yeah. And I don't know what the reticence has been traditionally. I think maybe there's some sort of fear of price compression or something along those lines. But I mean, honestly, I think the industry needs to take the plunge, be transparent, and trust that the merchants are smart enough to understand the utility that they're getting. Yeah. And that's the approach that we're taking. And ultimately, we want merchants to be successful. We want them to have more customers. We want them to make more money.
Right.
We want to make some money too. And as long as you're transparent about that, I think it's a fair deal.
Yeah, so across JD Power Studies and retail banking, credit card, et cetera, as you might imagine, customer understanding of pricing and fee structures is, I mean, it's just super important everywhere. There's no other, there is no other way to say it. And I think, you know, a dynamic we're dealing with in this industry is that, you know, to the point of customers having clarity and understanding of pricing. I mean, we clearly saw that if customers understand it, their pricing isn't as big of a factor. I like to use the example of gasoline prices, right? Most of us would notice in the news if oil prices are going up and we see gas prices go up, and we may not like it, but okay, we get it, we understand it. When any type of consumer has less clarity on the economics of the business of their provider and what might be driving those prices up, and if they don't understand them, just going to be less satisfaction with that. One of the other really interesting things we saw in the study is technology engagement can drive satisfaction increases. Probably not a shocker, but I mean, and again, I think we as consumers know this, and we see it in research that the more consumers are engaged with a service, the deeper relationship, higher satisfaction and loyalty. What this chart is tracking is, in the questionnaire, we asked the small businesses about beyond payment acceptance, what types of business tools are you using, right? Apps, online tools, all the great things that are going on out here in the exhibit hall. So what we're tracking here are the percentage of small businesses that say they use these services, and then we're able to calculate a satisfaction point increase on the vertical if these services are being used. So you see some are higher than others. The green on some of the dot points, those are services that kind of link back to the customer, right? Customer reservations, reward programs, surveys, and so forth. So really interesting, and when you see it, it makes sense, right? I mean, for a business that's working with their payment processor and or their payment processor's technology to help the business manage inventory, sales tax, invoices, et cetera, accounting and bookkeeping support. Really important satisfaction drivers. The chargeback one gets a lot of questions. I attribute that to being just sort of a less satisfying experience, period. Right?
Nobody likes that.
Nobody likes it, right? So okay, if they use the tool, there's a little bit of a satisfaction lift, but not as great as some of the others. And let me kind of lead off with Mark again, because this is your business is kind of really oriented around this. What first of all, I mean, part one is sort of what's your reaction to this, and then kind of part two would be as you kind of look to the future, what of these items do you think will be important? This has been our
thesis since the beginning. We started Clover specifically because we would go out there and we were inventing new applications to help merchants run their business better, and we try to get them integrated in the existing point of sale systems, of which there are like 1,400 in the United States, right? That, if nothing else, that reflects the incredible diversity of merchant needs. It's not that there's too many companies. So you have 5 pizza shop POSs and 5 ice cream shop POSs and hardware store POSs and all this, because there's incredible diversity of merchant needs, and therefore you have an incredible fragmentation in the industry. What we realized is that someone needs to build a platform where you can allow people to integrate these things easily. And what we also realized, the corollary to that, is that I couldn't possibly think of all the things that merchant needs. And I could never be an expert at all the things that merchants need. Right. And so why not build a platform and allow people to integrate into that and create those specific solutions? And so, and I think the thesis is really playing out. And some of the applications that have been built on top of our platform and on our competitors' platforms, I would have never guessed they'd be so successful. like Homebase, for example, and employee timekeeping and payroll integrations. That would have been at the bottom of my list. I wouldn't think employee timekeeping, but these guys and gals were experts, and they knew that this was really important to merchants, and sure enough, they keyed in much, much better than I could. And what's interesting about this is I think it's only to become more important, because now that you have technology, it used to be 10, 20 years ago that if you wanted to build a new loyalty program or coupons on receipts, or you'd have to work with Catalina marketing, you'd have to be a big enterprise, you had to have an IT organization, you had to get it done. And small businesses could never compete in that. So with the democratization that technology brings, we're finding this interesting environment where big companies are still doing that sort of innovation, like the Amazons of the world. They're coming up with things like Amazon, Go stores. You can go pull something off the shelf and this and that. But guess what? There are 1,000 small companies out there that are watching what Amazon's doing, and they're going to cherry pick the best things. And they're going to offer it to all businesses. And so creating a runway to allow for technology to quickly integrate with the SMB, I think is key. And so therefore, a long way of saying, this doesn't surprise me at all. I think it's the future of the industry. I think it's back to the point I was making earlier about providing utility. Provide utility to the merchants. They will be with you longer, they're less likely to attrit, and they're delighted to pay. And so even the other day, we had some qualitative surveys where we released some features, and unexpectedly, merchants said that their revenues went up. And I said, well, that wasn't a revenue-generating feature. How on earth did that happen? They said, well, it created so much efficiency in how I run my business that I was able to get more customers through. And so as technology changes the industry and allows for merchants to riff, if you will, and optimize their businesses, I think this slide is only to become more important. You're going to see everything move up and to the right.
Yeah, this was just fascinating the first time we saw it. So at a large bank like Chase, you also have small businesses that could be using cash management, credit services, a range of things. Those are also tools, and you provide tools and other types of reporting associated with these types of things. So how do you think about kind of driving adoption of these types of services within your client base?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think Mark's right when he talks about there's no one solution or two solution or three solution or five solutions, and there's probably over 1,000 solutions out there, just because everything's unique and everything's changing so rapidly. At Chase, that means a couple of things to us. One is ensuring that the core set of products we have today, we're able to integrate in and bundle. Michelle used the word bundle earlier, and I think it's a great word. But also for us, it means things like our WePay integration. So WePay is the company we bought a year ago. It allows us to do better, deeper integrations with our tech partners like Authorized.net. We have a fantastic relationships that's brought business to both our companies, as well as more vertical integrations with things like Touch Bistro for restaurants or with FreshBooks for contractors and self-employed. And those vertical integrations are really how we start bringing those packaged, bundled value solutions in a way that makes it easy for ISVs and VARs to plug into us and for tighter working relationships with tech partners. And again, we started off the whole conversation about technology and the pace of innovation, and those are the ways that we're bringing it to concepts like this.
Yeah. So Michelle, if a business is using these types of tools, there's data. There's a lot of data that can be understood, potentially monetized. Where do you, I mean, and this is sort of nascent and will become more important in the future. What do you see as the data implications of this?
Well, at Visa, we have a lot of data, and we love data, so definitely up our alley. So I think what's nice about the compilation of all of these services working together is how they can be so complementary in the data perspective. So we all see core transactional data that's our bread and butter. The opportunity then to add elements on like point of sale SKU items, like actually seeing what consumers are purchasing in the store, looking at time of day, things that we couldn't normally see in a pure processing environment, and making those additive to the data ecosystem that we have will enable us to create much stronger insights for merchants, for banks, for technology partners to really help them manage their business. So I think overall there's just a ton of potential here. And I think, especially in e-commerce, this has been our heritage over the past decade, some of it happening very purposefully and some of it happening in a really natural, organic way. We operate with open APIs. The ecosystem is, very easy for partners to integrate into. And so a lot of these capabilities, we have made the purposeful decision, and I think it's very consistent with your companies as well, is that we don't build it all ourselves. And so what we really do is we look for all of these innovators, these fintechs, they're creating really cool components of technology that are quite additive to standard payment processing, and that makes our solution richer. And so we are also in the position where we don't pick winners, we open the door and we enable anyone to come into us to really create that rich ecosystem of lots of capabilities working together. So I think from an e-commerce perspective, we're well on our way, perhaps a little easier than the point of sale environment because of the way that the technology foundation works there. And I think that, going back to your original question, Paul, the implication for data is so rich here. And I think that's the door that we just have to open as an industry at this point and figure out how we can use the data insights that we're going to get from these aggregate solutions, not only for the benefit of, processors, for ISOs and banks, but to really drive that value back to our end customer to make their businesses stronger.
So in a moment, we'll open it up for audience questions. So if you have any, think about them. We'll give you that chance in just a sec. Kind of last piece of information we wanted to share this morning is around kind of solving problems and the experience when a small business asks for help by picking up the phone, right? Which happens a lot. So there's a couple things happening on this slide. One is we ask small businesses, have you had a problem, right? Have you had a problem with your payment processor in the past 3 months? And as you can see, again, another story of very, very, differing experiences across the industry. I'll let you all just sort of guess on who has that 1% problem incidence. But the point is that when these things occur, more often than not, we found in the research, folks pick up the phone. And this, again, is the second most important KPI in this study. Makes sense. When I had to make a phone call, was it good? Was the telephone or the technical service rep helpful in providing support relating to technology? Because outside of questions regarding pricing, technology was kind of number two. Technology problems, leasing arrangements, and so forth were kind of in there as well as a hot spot of relating to technology. So, Mark, there's a couple pieces of this. I mean, certainly. What we want to do in the first place is prevent problems, right? We'd like to be that 1% or down as low as we can. What do you think about the sort of the key types of problems that you see that the industry needs to focus on and to address this type of metric?
Yep. Yeah, this is of paramount importance, and it is definitely a challenge. Merchants are not stupid, they're busy. And when something comes up that's not working, they get frustrated. And as the systems get more complex, there's gonna be more problems. And that leads to an entirely another problem, and that is that you have to have a new paradigm around support that can actually understand what sort of problem they're having. Because if you suddenly have not just a payment terminal, but an environment where there perhaps could be as many as 1,000 software applications running on it, How do you find that customer service rep who can support all those things? And how do you direct all the calls appropriately without frustrating people? And I think traditionally used to have, the more complex environments used to have the VARs that would go in there. And the VARs would go in, and I've heard stories about VARs hiding payment terminals in their clients' bathrooms. And so on Thanksgiving, when something, or Christmas, when something go down, they'd say, "Oh, go in the bathroom and look under the ceiling tile." They're like, "Oh my God, you hit that," that kind of thing. But merchant, this is a true story. But merchants are, I think, tired of the industry's changed, and they don't want to pay those fees anymore. They want the low cost and they want the high service. And so ultimately, I think we're in this gap period where we're not providing, as an industry, the kind of service that we need to, especially because the technological complexity of the merchant sphere is changing so quickly, it's been difficult to keep up. Yeah. And, but it absolutely is important. I also think that better products will solve a lot of this. Because again, a lot of the time, merchants just have difficulty with the lack of transparency. They just want to know why something is. So a lot of the calls start as technical. They're not technical because they don't understand why a deposit wasn't what they expected because there's some fee that they don't understand and things like that. And so I think transparency, better, as you noted, better hardware, better software will also help this quite a bit. But it is something, and it's a core point of focus for us, and I know it's a core point of focus for a number of our competitors as well.
Yeah. So Michelle, one of the interesting things we saw in the data is that e-commerce merchants actually reported a higher incidence of problems than card present. However, when it comes to problem resolution, they were more satisfied, right? Why do you think that might be the case?
It's really an interesting juxtaposition because I think, we've all done a lot of this research in our past, and usually what I see is this paradigm that the more service you need, the less you like it. Like that's what, when you see, Square, having really high satisfaction levels, it's because the service path is so simple, the solution is so simple, and so you need less service overall, and so that makes people more satisfied. So it's interesting to see in e-commerce, they're saying, I've got a lot of problems, but when I actually go through the resolution path, I'm pleased with the experience. So first what I would say is troubleshooting in the e-commerce environment is really, really hard. This is truly specialized stuff. In the card present world, also, very challenging, but you're dealing with a known most likely piece of software or hardware. So the ability to provide your reps with a really clear path of, I'm experiencing X on the device, pull up the guide, walk through the steps, and there's a known path to resolution. When an e-commerce merchant contacts us, for example, sometimes the first thing that we have to ask is, what are you using? There's, because of that open ecosystem and the way that all of these ISVs can integrate into us, we don't know the multitude of providers that they may have plugged into the front end of the solution that they're using with us. And so really not just, going through a very straightforward path, but having to narrow in on where the problem could possibly be, what's the partnership that you're even using, because I don't have that identified. So there's just a myriad of challenges in that experience. In terms of the satisfaction, I think that one thing that is very nice about the digital environment is that we can usually walk people through an experience that helps them, right? So let's look at your IP addresses, let's look at your settings. There's a lot of things that we can do that are truly digital to support that digital merchant. The card present environment is very tough, right? Like when that device goes down or someone spills a Coke on the point of sale, that's a really bad experience, because ultimately if I don't have a backup in the bathroom, like Mark said, then I've got to wait at best case 24 hours to get that device, and so that just leads to a lot of dissatisfaction in that experience. So I think that there's just a ton of potential, and what it shows is that the more quickly that you can resolve somebody's challenge, hopefully on the phone, hopefully not on the phone, right? So the ability to enable merchants to get that experience of support in a digital fashion, online, to use guides that really clearly walk them through the troubleshooting process, really is going to create a ton of customer satisfaction for us in the long term.
So Adam, Chase, across the fields that we study at JD Power, actually does very well at preventing problems and problem resolution, which for an institution your size is the Chase's size is impressive. And as we've been discussing, I mean, a big part of this meeting this KPI is trying to prevent problems in the first place. In a large organization like yours, what types of things are you kind of thinking about to continue to work this issue?
First, I'd like to acknowledge that this is one of the things that scares the heck out of me. And it's mostly because we've been talking to you for a little while now about technology and better integration with tech partners and bundling of services and meeting clients where they want to be, merchants where they want to be, new terminals, new tech, and all that stuff creates servicing challenges to be able to respond, because now all of a sudden the person on the other end of that call or the person going to the website needs a way to sort through the muck to get to exactly what their issue is, and often the issue isn't ours. So it's, the terminal's too far from the Bluetooth base, or there's a problem with the Wi-Fi in the building and the terminal isn't connecting properly, right? So we have to be almost a jack of all trades for this. But generally speaking, our philosophy is the best offense is a good defense. So we spend a lot of time understanding the root cause of our issues to try and avoid the problems in the first place. And that's really hard, because when you have somebody on the phone with you and they're screaming because it's now you're on 4, 5, 6 minutes and they're about to lose a sale because the person across the counter is also getting antsy, right? You want to be able to solve that problem quickly, but then you also want to be able to capture that issue and see if it's happening elsewhere, or see where you can root out the trouble. And I'll give you an example. When we looked at our complaint reasons, one of the main reasons was around account maintenance. And so we, noticed the trend in this. We had some of our specialists give us feedback on this, and we started looking at the forms. And the forms had literally a 50% reject rate. So every time one of these forms came through, only half of the time did they go all the way through. Half the time they stopped and we had to reach out to the client, or something else had to happen. So we looked at it, and the issue turned out to be one where it was a difference between legal name and doing business as name. And the form required one, and often you'd see the other, or a client would leave off Adam Lebowski LLC versus just Adam Lebowski. So that was causing the form to fail. So what we started to do was we implemented a pre-fill process. We checked with our legal and our compliance, and we worked to simplify the form. And that one change alone got that rate below 8%, and actually it got down further than that with some other changes. But it was really taking the time and the assessment of the root cause to understand what's driving all these things. The second thing we do is around, we know we're going to fall down. It's impossible not to. And I think clients actually know that it's going to happen sometimes. And it's not a surprise that once a year something may go wrong and they have to be on a call with us. So every call that comes in, we treat with the urgency and have the advocacy for the client about resolving that quickly and the steps to do it. And that's really the hard part. It's not, hey, could we solve this faster, or how do we show more advocacy? It's the things that enable that. It's the cross-training of the advisors across the various queues, so that if somebody calls in with one issue and they move to a second issue, you don't have to transfer the call to get them help, because you've now cross-trained, or you've empowered your front line with the 5 things that clients ask for that you weren't able to do in the past. So I'm going to kind of say there's no secret sauce to doing well with responding to incidents. It's a lot of hard work, and it's a lot of time, and it's a lot of effort, and it's a lot of root cause to really understand what's driving these dissatisfiers.
Yeah, and just incidentally, this industry average of 10% is pretty good. We see in some of our other studies, again, I'll reference back to retail banking and small business banking, 11, 12 is what we see in those studies. So this is all right. Questions? There must be hopefully Must be a few questions out there. Any questions from the audience? Oh, how about right down here in front?
In one of your early slides, you kind of aggregated the different type of merchant interactions that were happening there, and a big chunk of it was in that in-person category.
Yeah.
But that in-person category included calls and visits and emails and all the rest of that ecosystem. With this slide in mind, is there a breakdown of that cost through the different communication channels, so that if you know you need to provide support, but telephone is your only channel, that's a really costly and growth constrained platform, right?
Right.
Can you get that next level view and drill down into the outreach by channel, and maybe that's a next year.
Yeah.
But
first of all, I commend you for reading the footnote. That was very, very good. Yeah. We did not kind of get down into the cost component of that. And maybe some of the panelists. I mean, we all know that, if phone's more expensive than other types of interactions.
I mean, absolutely. Within our business, we're constantly looking at the various channels and the satisfaction levels that we're getting from those channels. So merchants are people just like us. Like, do you like to call anybody for help? So I think that is, while it's still a little bit too marginal, in my opinion, in terms of how we're really helping merchants in a truly, telephone hands-free fashion, when they can get their problems resolved via chat, via online forums. And the one thing to not underestimate is the way that merchants and developers especially help themselves. And that is so key to the satisfaction environment as well. So the more that we can create that ecosystem where developers especially can communicate, work together, and fix problems, understand how to code and build solutions so that they're problem-free. That is truly the secret to success. I don't think that we've done enough as an industry to enable that, but clearly that's the path where merchants experience the deepest levels of satisfaction for service.
Yeah, I would just add one thing to that, which is, I think a lot of us talk about self-service and it's important and so forth, but we look at it just a little bit differently, which is, what's the fastest way to get this done for the merchant? And often it's online, and technology is a fantastic enabler for this stuff, but it's often via the phone too. And a lot of that's putting yourself in the merchant's shoes. Like, if there's something wrong at point of sale and you get a customer waiting, you can't really disappear into the back so that you could go type online, right? You got to pick up the phone and call. And that's the way we look at it. Like, we want to help our customers in the ways they want to be helped. If that could be self-service, great. And if I can have a tech solution, we're going to do the tech solution. But if I can't, I need to be prepared to answer the phone quickly and get to the root of the issue fast.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The modality is really important. Like, you don't want to be crawling underneath your counter when customers are coming in trying to fix something.
Right.
You want to be able to pick it up. One of the things that we added recently to Clover that is had wild success is there's a big button that says, "I'm having a problem, call me." And you just hit the button. We have your number, of course, and so your phone rings. And so, yeah, it's the modality. I absolutely agree.
Yeah, from a study results standpoint, looking at this not cost of service, the service interactions piece, we gave people a few options. What we asked them is, how did you most recently interact with your provider, and then rate the satisfaction. It ends up that the highest satisfaction was with the salesperson, right? So that's good. Second highest was with the phone rep. So, good service there. When it got down into things like, and we see this across the multiple industries in our studies, when it comes to things like email support and online chat, satisfaction diminishes a bit more. I mean, part of that is, I think, part of that could be the consumer, the user, maybe not as familiar with the channel. But again, particularly in terms of chat servicing, it is newer. It's new technology, kinks are being worked out, and so we see that in our data pretty clearly.
And when you talk about cost, when you have your salesperson suddenly fulfilling a customer service role,
then
that's expensive support.
That's not right. That's right. There was another question. I think Steve may have had one.
On the self-service theme, there's a big push, but some of the people who have used the technology the most aggressively also have, in other surveys, ratings that show that their customers are pulling their hair out because they can't reach a human. You talked about the modality and the appropriateness to the situation, but even when you're setting up your account, a lot of people are pushing toward self-service. Do you think there's a downside to overextending that push where you lose the customer because you can't really be there at a time that it might impact your ability to get that client in the first place or keep him if there's an issue?
I absolutely do. I think there's, if we look at our customers, for example, just the usage of different applications on Clover, for example, you see a large percentage, maybe 50, 55%, that are very proactive and figure everything out on their own. These are the people who we ship them the devices and we do the customer introduction call. They say, oh, I don't need this call. It's all set. The rest of them, they need a lot of help. They need a lot of help. I've seen devices shipped to stores, and I've gone by that store once a month for a year, and they never turned it on, just because they couldn't get to it. Maybe they're a little bit of a Luddite, you know. So I definitely think that self-service has limitations if you want to address the full market. There's a very large market that is self-service oriented, and they are self-motivated merchants, but there's a large part that's either too distracted or not interested, not excited, and it's a chore, and so they really need the hand-holding. And a lot of the things we're doing, it's through the entire customer life cycle too. We're employing things where we can do that hand-holding. So we're reminding people, have you properly set up your inventory? Have you properly set up your employees? Have you properly, you know, can you be found on Yelp? Do you have a payroll integration? And so we've started this sort of secondary boarding process and within our environment just to really handhold merchants.
I think it has to be all about optionality. So, you know, merchants have different profiles. They're different types of buyers. We have to provide, you know, multiple channels for them to onboard, for them to get serviced, and you need an off-ramp throughout any one of those processes. You know, so I think as long as you are not cutting off a channel, I think providing those options is the best experience. You know, just give the customer what they want.
From the study data standpoint, what we saw was that 1% firm and then another one that was up there with lower incidence rates. Their problem resolution satisfaction scores were actually kind of low, right? So getting to the point you brought up, Steve, I mean, like, how do I reach these people? So clearly, in the case of a couple of brands examined, there is a business trade-off that's being made to some point, right? I mean, the good news is if only 1% of them are having a problem, then, you know, if those satisfaction levels are a bit lower, it's not going to kill you. Now, if you're the 18% player, whole other story. You're in a world of hurt if that resolution isn't excellent. Any other questions from the audience? Well, thank you for your attention. I'd like you to help me thank our panelists, Michelle, Mark, and Adam, for being with us this morning. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.